How gangs control Rikers Island behind bars. Rikers Island isn't just New York City's jail complex. It's a world within a world, where gangs shape daily life behind the walls. From control of cell blocks, to smuggling networks, to intimidation that even reaches correction officers, Rikers has long been described as a jail run, as much by inmates as by the state. But how exactly do gangs exert this control? And why has it proven almost impossible to break their grip? Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Your support helps us keep sharing these stories, and we wouldn't want you to miss any of the action. Now, let's get started. The Island of Power. Rikers Island is not a prison, but a jail complex, holding mostly pretrial detainees and some serving short sentences. It sits in the East River between Queens and the Bronx, housing around 6,000 to 7,000 inmates as of 2022, New York City Department of Correction, 2022. Yet despite being a temporary holding facility, Rikers has become infamous worldwide for its violence. According to a 2014 federal investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice, Rikers was found to have a deep-seated culture of violence against adolescents and pervasive gang influence inside its walls. U.S. DOJ, 2014. This makes Rikers unique. It's supposed to be a temporary stop, but in reality, it functions like a battleground where gangs dominate survival. Gangs behind the bars. The major gangs at Rikers mirror those on New York streets. The Bloods, the Trinitarios, the Latin Kings, the Crips, and others have historically fought for dominance. Their power behind bars isn't just about numbers, but about organization. According to a 2016 report in the New York Times, correction officers often rely on gang leaders, called house gang reps, to keep order in dormitories. New York Times, 2016. In practice, this means official authority can blend with inmate power, creating an environment where gangs act as both enforcers and protectors. By controlling phones, commissary, and contraband, gangs decide who eats safely, who showers without assault, and who gets targeted. For many inmates, aligning with a gang isn't about ideology, it's about survival. Violence as currency. Gang dominance at Rikers thrives on violence. The New York City Board of Correction has repeatedly reported staggering levels of slashings and stabbings. In 2021 alone, there were over 420 stabbings and slashings, the highest in decades. Board of Correction, 2022. Most of these incidents are gang-related, fueled by disputes over territory, debt, or betrayal. Correction officers themselves have testified in city council hearings that they often feel outnumbered and unsafe. City Council Hearing, 2021. Violence isn't random, it's strategic. As several court filings revealed in Nunez v. City of New York, a federal lawsuit over brutality and mismanagement at Rikers, gangs use calculated acts of violence to maintain control, intimidate rivals, and enforce debts. Nunez v. City of New York, 2015. Smuggling networks. Contraband, especially drugs and cell phones, fuels gang power. According to a 2017 Department of Investigation report, many smuggling operations at Rikers involved correction officers themselves, who were caught bringing in narcotics and weapons in exchange for bribes. NYC DOI, 2017. This creates a cycle. Gangs amass wealth and influence by controlling the underground economy, which they then reinvest into consolidating power. Federal prosecutors have described Rikers gangs as operating like corporations, with contraband sales funding protection rackets and street-level operations. U.S. Attorney's Office, SDNY, 2018. Phones in particular are key. With them, gang members inside Rikers coordinate not only jail politics but also activities on the streets, blurring the line between inmate and outside operations. Why control persists? Multiple commissions and oversight bodies have concluded that Rikers' chronic staffing shortages, corruption, and lack of accountability allow gangs to flourish. A 2022 New York Times investigation reported that many units at Rikers were left effectively unsupervised due to officer absences, leading to gangs setting the rules of dormitories. New York Times, 2022. The city has promised reform, including a plan to close Rikers by 2027. But until then, experts argue that the jail remains a perfect environment for gangs, a population churn of young detainees, insufficient staff, and a culture where violence is normalized. The Bloods Stronghold. The Bloods are widely considered the dominant gang inside Rikers. Their presence dates back to the early 1990s, when they grew rapidly as protection groups against rivals like the Latin Kings, according to the Village Voice 2001. By the 2000s, the Bloods had established sets, smaller factions under the Bloods umbrella, that controlled different housing units. According to testimony in the United States versus Rivera 2005, Bloods members ran extortion schemes, demanding commissary items and phone access from weaker inmates. One of their most notorious practices was the $150, a slashing across the face, leaving a scar of 150 stitches, used to instill fear and enforce rules. New York Times, 2015. The Trinitarios Rise. The Trinitarios, a Dominican gang, grew in strength during the 2000s. Initially founded in Washington Heights in the early 1990s, they established themselves at Rikers through tight ethnic bonds and strict discipline. FBI indictment, 2011. Inside the jail, Trinitarios often recruit young Dominican detainees quickly, offering protection in exchange for loyalty. Federal cases describe them as highly organized, with rules about language, respect, and financial contributions. United States versus De La Cruz, 2013. Their control inside Rikers often extends to street-level drug trade, using contraband phones to maintain business outside. DOJ, SDNY, 2018. The Latin Kings legacy. The Latin Kings, once the most feared Latino gang in New York prisons, still maintain a presence inside Rikers. Though their dominance has declined since the 1990s crackdowns, reports suggest they continue to influence contraband networks and alliances. New York Post, 2019. Unlike the Trinitarios' rigid discipline, the Latin Kings operate with a more fluid structure, often tied to street crews. Their survival inside Rikers is linked to reputation. Older members command respect through past violence and long-standing connections. Court records in People v. Sanchez, 2014, revealed how Latin Kings use jail time to regroup, recruit, and plan outside operations. The Crips and Rivalries, the Crips, though less numerous than the Bloods, maintain a strong presence in Rikers. According to New York Daily News, 2017, fights between Bloods and Crips inside the jail have been among the most violent recorded. Their rivalry often erupts over small disputes, phone time, commissary, or perceived disrespect. Yet each violent outbreak reinforces the gang's reputation and draws in recruits. Court testimony from correction officers revealed that gang wars inside Rikers are cyclical. Periods of fragile peace, followed by sudden eruptions of violence. City Council hearings, 2019. Gangs as governance. What makes Rikers unique is how gangs act not just as criminals, but as governors. A 2016 Federal Monitor's report on Rikers explained that officers sometimes let gang representatives enforce discipline within housing units. Nunez Consent Decree Monitor's report, 2016. This unofficial delegation of power creates a dangerous cycle. Gangs decide who gets punished, who gets protection, and who can move freely. In some dorms, inmates reported that house gangs controlled bed assignments, access to showers, and even food lines. New York Times, 2016. This blurring of authority explains why, despite reform efforts, gangs maintain an unshakable grip. The house gang system. One of the clearest examples of gang power is the house gang system. Each dorm or housing unit often has a gang-appointed leader who enforces rules. These inmates may be responsible for cleaning or organizing the unit, but in practice they act as power brokers. According to a New York Times investigation, 2014, officers frequently turned to Blin, DI, relying on house gangs to maintain order. But this meant violence and extortion were embedded into the daily structure of life at Rikers. Inmates who disobeyed were beaten, robbed, or slashed. The Kalief Browder tragedy. The case of Kalief Browder put a human face on Rikers gang violence. Arrested at 16 on suspicion of stealing a backpack, Browder spent 3 years at Rikers awaiting trial. mostly in solitary confinement. The New Yorker, 2014. Browder described being repeatedly attacked by gangs inside. Surveillance footage later showed him being assaulted by a group of inmates while officers stood by. He refused to join a gang, which made him a target. After his release, Browder took his own life in 2015. His story sparked national outrage and drew attention to how gangs dictate survival in Rikers. Slashings on the rise. In 2021, Rikers experienced the highest number of slashings and stabbings in decades, over 420 incidents, NYC Board of Correction, 2022. Most of these were gang-related. Court records in Nunez v. City of New York revealed that slashings were not random, but carefully ordered by gang leaders to enforce discipline. A slashing could be punishment for unpaid debts, betrayal, or refusal to comply with rules. The scars left behind were symbols of power, visible reminders that gangs controlled the jail. The smuggling scandals. Contraband is the lifeblood of gang control. In 2017, the Department of Investigation uncovered that dozens of correction officers were involved in smuggling rings at Rikers. Officers were caught bringing in scalpels, drugs, and cell phones. NYC DOI, 2017. In some cases, gang leaders coordinated the bribes directly. Federal prosecutors described how inmates used prepaid debit cards to pay officers, who would then deliver contraband during shift changes. United States v. Reed, 2018. These scandals revealed that corruption wasn't isolated. It was systemic. Without contraband, gangs would lose much of their leverage. With it, they maintain financial power and communication with the streets. The program units. In certain housing units, gangs have been known to run what inmates call the program. Here, the gang sets the rules for everyone in the unit, deciding who gets beds near windows, who eats first, and who gets punished. According to a 2015 New York Times report, some inmates said the program was more powerful than official jail policy. Joining it offered protection, but rejecting it often meant violent retribution. For outsiders, these units looked like organized communities. But for those inside, they were authoritarian micro-societies run by gangs, with their own justice systems. The 2015 federal lawsuit. The Nunez v. City of New York lawsuit, filed in 2011 and settled in 2015, revealed much of what was happening inside Rikers. Federal monitors concluded that widespread violence, poor supervision, and reliance on gangs had created a culture of brutality. The settlement required sweeping reforms, from use of force restrictions to new training for officers. But in follow-up reports, monitors have repeatedly found that gangs still fill the power vacuum when staff are absent or overwhelmed. Nunez Monitors Report, 2016-2022. The case confirmed what many already suspected. Gangs were not just part of Rikers. They were central to how it functioned. Corruption from within. Corruption inside Rikers has long been documented. A 2017 Department of Investigation probe revealed that more than 70 correction officers and staff were arrested over 5 years for smuggling or aiding gang operations, NYC DOI 2017. For some officers, the pressure came from gangs themselves. According to court filings, gangs threatened officers' families to force compliance. For others, the motivation was financial. Smuggling phones and drugs could yield thousands of dollars a week. U.S. Attorney's Office, SDNY, 2018. This erosion of official control blurred the line between guard and inmates, reinforcing the gang's dominance. Testimonies from the inside. Over the years, both former inmates and officers have testified about gang control. In 2016, the New York Times interviewed multiple correction officers who admitted that gangs ran the dorms because officers were outnumbered and feared retaliation. New York Times, 2016. Inmates have also described the system. One told ProPublica, 2019, "If you don't roll with a gang, you're prey. They control the phones, the food, the showers, everything." These testimonies give a rare look at life inside. For many, survival isn't about serving time. It's about obeying gang rules or facing the consequences. The crisis of 2021. By 2021, Rikers was in what the New York Times called a state of emergency. Staffing shortages left whole housing units unguarded for hours. Inmates reported going days without food deliveries or medical care. Amid this collapse, gangs filled the void. City reports documented how gang members assigned themselves as enforcers, deciding who could move around and who would be punished. Board of Correction, 2022. That year saw over 16 deaths in custody, the highest in decades. NYC Department of Correction, 2021. Advocates pointed to gang dominance and official neglect as twin causes of the chaos. Gangs and the streets. Rikers gangs don't just rule inside, they connect directly to New York's streets. With smuggled phones, gang leaders coordinate drug operations, robberies, and even violent hits outside. According to federal prosecutors, Rikers has functioned as a command center for certain sets of the Bloods and Trinitarios. In a 2018 indictment, prosecutors described leaders using jail phones to greenlight attacks in the Bronx and Manhattan. United States versus Batista, 2018. This link between jail and street creates a cycle. The power inmates hold inside fuels their reputation outside, and vice versa. Federal oversight and its limits. After the 2015 Nunez settlement, federal monitors were appointed to oversee reforms. Their reports from 2016 to 2022 paint a bleak picture. Despite new policies, violence and gang control remain entrenched. One 2021 report stated, "The department continues to rely on inmates affiliated with gangs to maintain order in dormitories, a practice that directly undermines safety." Nunez Monitors Report, 2021. This highlighted the central paradox. Reforms exist on paper, but inside Rikers, the gangs still hold the real authority. The plan to close Rikers. In 2019, New York City approved a $8.7 billion plan to close Rikers by 2027 and replace it with smaller borough-based jails. City of New York, 2019. Officials argued this would break the cycle of violence and reduce gang influence. But critics question whether moving inmates will solve the deeper issues. As one criminologist told The City, 2020, gangs don't disappear with geography. They'll take control wherever conditions allow. For now, Rikers remains open, and gangs continue to run daily life behind its walls. The Bloods, Godfathers. Inside Rikers. In the early 2000s, investigators uncovered how Bloods leaders at Rikers coordinated their sets like a pyramid. Federal indictments revealed leaders known as Godfathers or High Fives, who directed assaults and extortion schemes from inside their cells. U.S. v. Rivera, 2005. One correction officer testified that younger inmates were ordered to carry out slashings on command, a system designed to maintain fear and loyalty. City Council hearings, 2006. This chain of command showed that gangs weren't just groups of inmates. They were organized hierarchies running parallel to official jail authority. Trinitarios and the Green Wall. The Trinitarios became infamous for their coordinated discipline. According to federal indictments, they required members to speak only in Spanish, obey curfews, and follow an internal green wall of loyalty. DOJ, 2011. Inside Rikers, this translated into militarized dormitories. Correction officers reported entering units where Trinitarios enforced silence, organized chores, and punished violators with beatings. NYC Doc testimony, 2015. This discipline made them harder to control, as officers often couldn't distinguish between legitimate order and gang-enforced rule. The Latin Kings courtroom strategy. The Latin Kings have used Rikers not only as a stronghold, but as a legal planning ground. Court records show members drafting appeals, coordinating testimony, and even intimidating witnesses from behind bars. People v. Sanchez, 2014. A 2019 New York Post investigation revealed that Latin Kings members used contraband phones to threaten rivals' families on the outside, proving their influence extended far beyond the jail's walls. Their longevity stems from reputation. Even in decline, the Crown still commands respect among older inmates. The Crips enflash violence. Unlike the Bloods' structured dominance, the Crips at Rikers often assert control through sudden, spectacular violence. In 2017, a series of high-profile slashings between Bloods and Crips led to multiple lockdowns. New York Daily News, 2017. One officer told the Daily News, "When the Crips make a move, it's quick and brutal. They want to send a message that even if they're outnumbered, they won't back down." These flashpoints fuel the cycle of retaliation, with dormitories erupting in violence that spreads through the complex. The economics of survival. Beyond violence, gangs dominate Rikers through economics. Commissary goods, ramen noodles, candy, toiletries, become currency. Inmates who control commissary, often through intimidation, act as bankers for the unit. New York Times, 2016. Debts are enforced with violence. A pack of ramen can lead to a beating if unpaid. As one former inmate told ProPublica, 2019. It's like Wall Street, but if you miss a payment, you bleed. By monopolizing this underground economy, gangs transform basic goods into systems of power. Infamous slashing cases. In 2015, city officials highlighted the case of an inmate slashed across the face after refusing to give up commissary to Bloods members. His wounds required over 100 stitches. NYC Council hearing, 2015. In another case, a Trinitarios member ordered a $1.50 attack on arrival to mark betrayal. Officers reported that slashings were so common that inmates carried towels to press against wounds while waiting for medical help. New York Times, 2015. These cases underscored how violence wasn't random. It was the core of governance. Media spotlight and public outrage. High-profile cases like Kalief Browder's brought unprecedented attention to Rikers. Documentaries, news investigations, and advocacy campaigns forced the city to acknowledge the depth of gang control. A 2015 New Yorker expose called Rikers a pipeline of violence, describing it as an environment where gangs operated with near impunity. Public outrage grew, fueling the political momentum for Rikers' eventual closure plan. Yet for those inside, conditions remained largely unchanged. The legacy of fear. Decades of gang control at Rikers have left a lasting impact on New York City's justice system. Former inmates carry scars, both physical and psychological. Families recall the constant fear of visits interrupted by news of violence. Experts argue that Rikers became a school of crime, where young detainees entered uninitiated and left indoctrinated into gang life. DOJ, 2014. The legacy of fear ensures that even with reform promises, the reputation of Rikers as a gang-ruled island will endure. Rikers Island remains one of the most notorious jails in America, a place where gangs enforce the rules and survival often means submission. The city has promised change, but until the doors finally close, the question remains, who really controls Rikers? The law or the gangs? If you found this video informative, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And let us know in the comments, what do you think it will take to finally break the cycle at Rikers Island?